Okay, welcome back. I hope you guys were able to take a bio break and maybe get a beverage of choice. Since we haven't been together at the Northeast in quite some time, we have decided that we would like to address some of the great work that's been done in the Northeast region since we met. So I would like to introduce first Colleen Smith, the administrator for New Hampshire's Bureau of Public Health Food Protection Section. Colleen will be speaking about the creation of a wild mushroom forager certification in the state of New Hampshire. So I will turn it over to Colleen.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to talk today about New Hampshire's experience on creating a wild mushroom certification program. And I'll preface this by saying this, we're just in the infancy of this. Cathy Feeney, who's following up after myself from the state of Rhode Island, they actually have a program up and running. But so we're just in the initial stages, and I'll definitely, it's been a extremely lengthy process. So I'll walk you through the steps it took for us to get to where we are today. Next slide, please. So how it started was our department received many inquiries from wild mushroom harvesters, and WHM, if you, in the world of acronyms, is wild harvested mushrooms. We have received them over the years, harvesters wanting to sell these to restaurants and to retail food stores. We had adopted the 2009 food code, which had said wild mushrooms were only allowed at food establishments if approved by a wild mushroom expert. And we had certainly no one on our department that was a mushroom expert, or we didn't feel comfortable deeming anyone in the state as a wild mushroom expert. So because of that, we exempted out that section of the code and just did not allow any wild harvested mushrooms to be sold either at retail stores or to restaurants. I have to say it probably was happening behind our back, or at the back door of the restaurant where the harvester would come and have the special of the day, but we officially didn't allow it. And certainly if we found wild mushrooms that couldn't be shown that they were from a food processor, we would have them be disposed of because they weren't from an approved source. Next slide, please. So because of this outcry from harvesters, we tried for many years on an ad hoc basis. We had members from industry, academia, our Department of Health, and then also Department of Agriculture. We would meet frequently to discuss some of the issues to see how we might be able to come up with a safe way for harvesters to offer their wild harvested mushrooms to the industry. However, it was very difficult. The work group stalled because there were a lot of issues to overcome that some were beyond the public health principles that we live in. There were issues with regard to ethics and land use, whether or not mushrooms could be harvested on state property, on federal forest lands, or if there should be owner permission for someone to harvest mushrooms on their property. We also stumbled around the certification process. What would that look like? As I mentioned, we at the Department of Health certainly didn't feel comfortable that we had the expertise in deeming what would be allowable mushrooms to be sold, what species of mushrooms to be sold, and also what that education course would look like. We had we don't have a mycologist on staff. We certainly weren't the experts in what that training certification process would look like. And as I mentioned too, what would be that list of allowable wild mushrooms, those that are easily identifiable, that wouldn't be mixed with a poisonous variety. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we adopted the 2017 food code. And if you have followed this issue over the last 10 years or so, you know, as the food code has come into different versions, so has the wild mushroom section. And the 2017 food code had a more robust, especially in the annex, a suggestion on how a regulatory agency could come up with a way for approving wild mushrooms to be served at food establishments. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, our ad hoc work group had, we just couldn't move things forward. The issues seemed to be needing some legislative buy-in. And one of the wild harvester industry individuals, he reached out to a legislator in his area and actually was able to have him propose, this legislator propose study commission to study the issue in New Hampshire. Is it something New Hampshire needs? Is there value in having a program to license individuals to forage wild mushrooms, to have some kind of approval process before they sell to restaurants or other distributors or farmers markets in New Hampshire? And so that legislation passed to form a commission. That commission was formed in the fall of 2019. It consisted of industry members, academia members, myself, who represented the Department of Health, members from the Department of Agriculture, and of course, New Hampshire legislators. Next slide, please. So out of that commission became a report to recommend legislation in the following session to implement an actual program for certification and registration of individuals who wanted to not only harvest, but we also learned through our commission work that there are people that just identify, they don't do the harvesting, but they identify the wild mushrooms. And also it could be a separate person that's actually distributing the wild mushrooms. So there was legislation proposed in our 2020 legislative session. It had passed our House of Representatives, but unfortunately our legislature went on hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and only certain initiatives actually made it through the 2020 session. And unfortunately the mushroom legislation was tabled. So we went through the whole process again in 2021 through the legislative session, and luckily it passed both houses and was signed by our governor in June of 2021. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot from Food Safety News after our governor had signed that legislation into effect, and it actually doesn't in effect take place until July 1 of 2022. We have to have some time to develop our rules around this, so we do have a busy next few months in preparing for this legislation to be actually in place. Next slide, please. So the new law requires a license for anyone harvesting, identifying, or distributing wild mushrooms for sale in New Hampshire. That licensure, there will be a fee. They also will have to provide proof of filling educational requirements. And also it's stipulated in the law that the licensees may only harvest on a property with documented permission from a landowner or manager. And that was a very sticking point for the public testimony when this law was being heard in our legislature, is that there landowner rights that we thought that might kill the bill, because it was certainly much debate and discussion during those hearings. Next slide, please. So the new law will require the mushroom harvester to label their product with the name and address and license number of that individual, the species that they are providing, the weight sold, and the date and county of harvesting. And that county of harvesting was actually also another sticking point as our legislation was moving through, is that people that harvest mushrooms tend to be very secretive about they think they call it the honey pot, that where the most valuable mushrooms are might be present, and they even felt that even disclosing a county was proprietary or trade secret information. They also have to keep a copy of that label for 1 year, and the food establishment that they offer this product to has to keep a copy of the label for 90 days. And we pattern that the 90-day requirement along with the mollusk and shellfish tags. We felt that 90 days was something that industry should be comfortable with as for retention. So that's where that 90 days came in. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of work to do still in the coming months to prepare for the law to be effective date of July 1. We have to develop rules for the licensure. We also we're working with our academia partners to work on the educational course that will include safe handling and storage of mushrooms, review record keeping requirements, ethics of harvesting, and it will require no less than 12 hours of in-person instruction with a preparatory online module. Next slide, please. Also, there was a desire, and it passed through this legislation, to have those that are certified for tier 1, which are mushrooms that are more easily identifiable with no toxic lookalikes and which are unlikely to cause human illness. And also for those that are more expert mushroom harvesters, a list of tier 2 mushrooms, which are more difficult to identify. And the courses will be slightly different for each of these tiered mushrooms. And of course, we'll have a fine schedule for those that violate. And we also are required to post information about mushroom identification and the list of approved licensees on our website. Next slide. So just wanted to close with some of our lessons learned. As I mentioned before, what we thought might be an easy process, especially I'm sure there are many of us out here who have dealt with this issue. It is very complex. There's a side to it that has not only to do with the human illness side, but there are ethical issues. There's a highly economic issue to this because if you have ever tried to purchase wild mushrooms, you know that they can be quite pricey, and people make thousands, or their whole income is based on just harvesting mushrooms. And as I mentioned before, there is privacy issues. People don't want to divulge where they're foraging for mushrooms. It can be very secretive. We had heard experiences from other states where there's even could be threats or safety issues if people are on a certain territory that they're not supposed to be in, or in another harvester's area, that there were issues beyond just the things that we're concerned about from public health to be considered. We also had great collaboration that were formed from the ad hoc group and the commission that were successful in getting this to pass through our legislature. We actually found through our commission work that we had great industry support. Our restaurants wanted the program so that they could feel comfortable that the people that they were buying products from had been vetted, had been educated, and knew the correct types of mushrooms that wouldn't necessarily make someone ill. Also, we heard from other mushroom harvesters who wanted this program as a way that they can show that they are legitimate, that they had passed this course. They could show this to their stores, they could show this to their restaurants and to weed out those that might not be so educated and could be providing things that could make someone ill. So in a state whose motto is live free or die, this was no small feat to pass something that's actually more regulation. That's not something that's necessarily easy to to get across to our legislature. So definitely those collaborations with industry to support this, along with us and the demonstrating the public health need and importance of this, were what were helpful in getting this law to finally pass. And next slide, please. I am happy. I have to put my dad joke in here, and I know we'll probably jump back for questions, but this is one of my favorite that is a somewhat appropriate for this presentation.
I'll give you a giggle. Hey, that was cool. Really greatly appreciate that, Colleen. We'll put questions at the end of the segment because we do have one more speaker, and her name is Cathy Feeney. Cathy is the chief of the Rhode Island Department of Health Center for Food Protection. And Cathy will be speaking about Rhode Island's Wild Mushroom Forager Certification Program. Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide. So obviously mushrooms are nothing new, but they're a little bit new to regulatory agencies. And it's something that, you know, we kind of have looked the other way for a long time. And so what happened in Rhode Island was interesting. And I'm going to tell you the whole story because we didn't do all the stuff Colleen did. And I'm wondering if we should have. We didn't do any of the legislative stuff because we looked at the food code and we have adopted, you know, the most recent version of the food code for quite a few years now. And so, you know, we looked at the language and thought, you know, it has to be somebody who has that expertise, but who has that expertise? So we did a lot of research on that. But obviously mushrooms have been around a long time. And I thought that cookbook from 1899 was pretty interesting. And the fact that an Iceman 5,000 years old had 2 species of mushrooms in his pouch was really, really interesting. So they've been a source of food for a very, very long time. But scary is held for us as regulators because we really weren't sure what to do with them. Next slide, please. So this is our application, but I want to tell you the story about how we got to this point. So we had one person he's obsessed with mushrooms. He's also a chef, but it is his life's passion. And he actually attended a course in Michigan and he kept calling us. And I sat in my office and I remember it like it was yesterday with Cathy White, who's a supervisor in a center, and saying, what are we going to do with this guy? And at the same time, we realized that a lot of people were buying mushrooms from, you know, people who were unapproved. And that's scary too. So we're thinking, you know, it's happening. We know it's happening. We don't know what to do with it. And we have this person, his name is Spike, who knows a lot about mushrooms. He almost became like our consultant. And he was the first one to actually get approved. And he actually took the course in Michigan. He did all the work for us. You know, he helped us with the application, what we need to be looking for. He gave us a list of mushrooms that are available in our area in Rhode Island, and, you know, explained that mushrooms are different in different locations. So what's good in Michigan, where he took the course, might not be something that we even see in Rhode Island. So he explained a lot of it to us. I also contacted people that were on the Conference for Food Protection Committee and also looked at the AFTA website and got a lot of information from those sources as well. But we came up with an application and Spike was the first person who applied. And so he helped us, you know, with what information we should ask for even. And, you know, by talking to him and getting a better understanding of it, and also looking out to the resources that were developed, you know, through the Conference for Food Protection Committee and on the AFTA website, we were able to have a pretty good idea we were going in the right direction. And the way we looked at it was, it's happening. We might as well get it approved so that restaurants will know that they can buy these from an approved source. And then maybe restaurants will start looking for some kind of a certificate or approval from the Department of Health so that they know they're getting mushrooms that are safe. So this application has like the name of the harvester, the business name, address, all that kind of information. When the harvester or forager applies, they have to let us know what their qualifications are. And so we're requiring them to take the course, and we actually look at the course to make sure it's an approved course. And we've only had a few. So the course in Michigan was approved, and we actually talked to regulators in Michigan that were actually attending the course at the same time that the person from Rhode Island was, and they gave us a lot of information. There's also a course in North Carolina that some people have taken. It's the Stone Mountain course. And I'm sure there are others, but we just haven't come across them. So we'd actually do research into the, who was teaching the course, was it legit, was it associated with a university, that kind of thing. And so they usually have an idea of where they want to sell and also where they want to forage. And so we were asking for that information as well. And what species were they interested in doing? And Spike provided us a list of, it was like 4 pages of mushrooms that are safe, that don't have lookalikes that could be toxic. So he really helped us a lot. Next slide. So we're also requiring, like Colleen mentioned, a lot of record keeping. So we asked the forager or harvester to keep a list of the establishments that he sold the mushrooms to, with their common name and scientific name, the location of the harvest, the date, and the date that he sold it. And we actually asked the person who purchased the mushrooms, the restaurant, to keep a tag as well. And we also recommended that they keep it for 90 days. And they have to have the quantity that they purchased, again, the common name, who they purchased it from, again, the date of harvest, and the net weight. Next slide. They also, what we asked them to do was on their tags to make a disclaimer that these are wild harvested mushrooms and they're not an inspected product, because we're obviously not out there inspecting them while they're harvesting them in the forest. And just so that it's buyer beware, and just to kind of increase the awareness that there are issues with mushrooms, and we want to make sure they're from a safe source. Next slide. So this is Spike's certificate, and this is actually for his training course, which, he educated us. He came in with all his mushrooms, and he did a fantastic presentation for our inspectors, and he talked to a lot of other people that are foraging. So he actually brought in a couple of more people that applied. So we really only have like 3 people right now who are an approved source of these foraged mushrooms. And they've all taken, a pretty lengthy course, and, they really seem to understand it, and they're passionate about it. That's the thing that we found with these people. They really, really feel very strongly about wild mushrooms and how good they are and how they're a good source of food. And, but they realize too, they respect that there could be issues with them. And some do have toxic lookalikes that could make somebody really, really sick. But this is Spike's training certificate for his program. But he also had given us a certificate from the program he took in Michigan, and we looked at that. So, and I also want to mention Lydia Brown, who's actually on this call. She's been working a lot with Spike, and he's just a great source of information, and he keeps us updated on new things and what's happening in the industry. Next slide. So this is just a picture of the mushroom, just so people can see it close up and personal. I'm not a mushroom expert. I have to rely on the other people who are. And it took us a long time to really, trust Spike and, trust the other people that were, foraging mushrooms, because, as regulators, we're suspicious. But after talking to him for a long time and really seeing all he knew and, looking at what classes he attended, and we just felt really, really comfortable that he would be our consultant, and he would help us get other people, approved to do it as well. so that we don't have people doing it, recklessly, and we don't know what the source is. Next slide. So he told us that we really need to emphasize these kinds of things, that, if you're a beginner, don't even think about attempting to pick a mushroom that you're not absolutely certain about and you can identify. There are some that you really can't tell the difference, and he really recommended, and we recommend, that beginners stay away from those. You need a certain level of expertise to be able to tell them apart. And he said, making sure people, and one of the things he really told us was that, he said that he wouldn't eat raw mushrooms, but later on he actually retracted that and said that there are some that are really good raw, but for the most part, he said, cook the mushrooms and make sure they're not rotten, slimy, moldy, or anything like that, or have insect infestation. So you really want to make sure you visually inspect the mushrooms. And he said to remember that mushrooms need to breathe, and that's why you always see the holes in the packaging. And otherwise they will get slimy and moldy and that type of thing. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So obviously there are such a thing as toxic mushrooms. Toxins are produced naturally in certain mushrooms. But what we found is the concentration varies considerably. It can vary by the part of the mushroom, like the cap versus the stem. And it also varies a lot by geographic location. And another interesting thing we found out was that it also depends on the weather. So there's certain times when there's been a lot of outbreaks of mushroom poisoning, and it was related to weather conditions at that time. So next page. So there's different types of toxicity. Some, are a lot more toxic than others. Some will just make you a little bit sick, and some you might not even know you got sick from the mushroom. You just know that you're having a little bit of a GI distress, but there's some that really, really cause problems. And I never can pronounce all the toxins or all the mushrooms, but the amatoxins seem to be the most common, and it's really a fast-hitting type of situation where you'll actually get really, really sick really quickly, but then you start to feel better for a short time, and then it sneaks up on you again, and it can cause liver failure, coma, and death. It's really, really scary. And there's some neurotoxins that will make, you'll be sweating, in a coma, hallucinate, those type of things. Some just cause mild GI distress, and some are like anti-abuse. So that you wouldn't get sick unless you drank alcohol within 72 hours. And this type of toxin interferes with alcohol metabolism. So people will have a really severe reaction if they drink alcohol within 72 hours of having that type of mushroom. So I thought it was interesting. There's all different types of toxins that do different types of things. And it was funny because as soon as we approved Spike, and what we did with the approval is we didn't license them. At first we were going to license them, and I think we might have even tried to at the very beginning, but the license was pretty expensive, and he was only going to be able to, because he'd be doing a wholesale product. So we're thinking, what license do we give him? Is it wholesale? And our wholesale license is like the most expensive license, and he wasn't even going to break even. So what we decided to do after that was we did an approval letter for him, and it's kind of like he can bring that to places and show them that, and we'll vouch for him and he's approved, but we didn't actually give him a license per se, just because we didn't have really a way of doing that in our system. Next page. So, and as soon as we finished giving Spike his approval, I read Food Safety News, like within a week, there was a big outbreak in California, and I got so nervous. And I can remember talking to Spike and saying, "You better know what you're doing," because we had just approved him, and we're thinking, "This is great. We got him approved. He knows a lot." And then I see this outbreak. But there's, I looked through Food Safety News and some other sources, and there's been a lot of outbreaks in France in 2020 and Ontario, Canada. There were some in Italy, Hong Kong, Australia. thousands of outbreaks in China. And then in Northern California, recently there was 14 that got ill, and 3 of those 14 required liver transplants. And a child had permanent neurological impairment. The others recovered, fully recovered, and even the ones with the liver transplant are perfectly healthy now, according to what I read. But you know, they just went through a lot. Next slide. So the mushroomexpert.com was a website that Spike told us about. So I started looking through it, and these are all people who are equally fanatical about mushrooms. And what they do is they identify different mushrooms, they take pictures, and they put down the source. So you can see, like, the first picture there is in nearby Connecticut. Spike kind of lives on the western border of Rhode Island, which is close to Connecticut. So he goes into Connecticut to Forage at times. And then we had some from Gloucester, Rhode Island, in Situate. And then there was another one that was from Virginia. So evidently he traveled and, you know, posted a picture of that type of mushroom. So these people, they're all over. You can see your area. You can search this website and find out what the mushroom enthusiasts are posting in your area. But I was amazed at how many pictures and how many locations were shown on this website. Next slide. So, and these were some of the locations. So you can see it's like, and they're real specific in some cases. Like if you look down at the bottom, there's one that says, you know, 1 mile west of Ice House Reservoir, El Dorado County, California. You know, they were real specific about locations, 100 block 9th Avenue, in North Avenue North, Jacksonville Beach, Florida. So, you know, like Colleen said, a lot of them are real secretive, but a lot of them are really like so enthusiastic that they're on all these web pages and they're posting pictures of their mushrooms and they're talking to other people. And it's really like, you know, interesting to see, you know, how excited these people are about these mushrooms that, you know, we don't even know what to do with, you know. And even though, you know, it's very rare that there is toxicity, but it's very, it can be really, you know, it can be fatal. So it's something we always have to pay attention to. So we do have to be careful. But I think if, you know, we can get people who know, who are knowledgeable, and we can approve those people, we're doing ourselves the favor in a way because it's happening anyway. And that's why we did it. Next slide. So I just wanted to point out some guidance documents, and AFTO has some great things. They have all the laws and guidance from each state on mushrooms, and then some resources as well. So you can always look for that information on that. There's information on the Conference for Food Protection website as well with their guidance document. And I think it might be on the website, the AFTO website too, the same document. So you can look either place for that one. And next slide, I think that's it. Here's some more resources that you'll be getting a copy of the presentation if you wanted to look more into it. But it's just a lot of different things you can look at. And a lot of states have done a lot of work, so you can look at what they've done. But, you know, we were kind of like not knowing what to do with it. And we didn't really have a license per se. That, you know, we have facility licenses and we have licenses for like certified food safety managers and certified food safety instructors, but we really don't have a license specifically for another professional. So we weren't sure what to do. And, you know, we weren't sure if we should actually do a license or if we should just do an approval. But what we do is we have the person, and we've only had 3 so far, so it hasn't been a lot of work for us, but the person's filled out the application. They tell us exactly where they're going to harvest, what type of mushrooms they're going to be picking, and we check it against the list that we have of all the approved ones to make sure there are no species in there that we haven't approved that could have toxic lookalikes. We've always, you know, we're playing it safe. We're trying to make sure that, you know, if there's any chance at all of somebody picking up a mushroom and it not being safe, that, you know, we've not even allowed that possibility. So we're just we're just being really, really like conservative about it is what I'm trying to say. So I think that's it for the presentation, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
sharing those resources and your experience in Rhode Island, as well as Colleen. We do have some questions in the chat. Let's see. This one is for Colleen. Does the Department of Health and Human Services inspect Dunk's mushrooms at all as a food processor? I see they list themselves as an FDA licensed food processor. Are they farming versus wild harvesting? Should they be considered an approved source?
So we do actually have that manufacturer licensed as a processor, and so so they're not involved with in this. I think they were actually one of the industry members who spoke at our commission meetings wanting the certification process, but they are actually a license as a processor. I believe they do, one of their products is a mushroom jerky.
Thank you for that. We have a question, and I think this might be for you, Colleen, as well. Who will put together the online training? Mushroom identification is tricky. I'm wondering why there is no practical in-person training required.
So so our training is actually going to have an online pre-component, and then it's going to be followed up with an in-person class, and which would have an examination as part of it. We are working with our academic partners to develop, some mycologists that we've been in conversation with to develop that curriculum. As I mentioned, we at the Department of Health didn't have that expertise to develop the species lookalikes and so forth. So we're relying on our academic partners. So it will be a course that's not offered through the health department. It will be through either UNH likely will be the provider of that course.
And maybe we'll kick this into Cathy, but both of you can certainly answer this question. It says, do either of you look into requiring mushroom forager obtaining the FDA certification stated in the model food code?
Not certification. I think what we looked at it as an approval, and we tried to determine what an expert was. And so what we did was, we listed the criteria that somebody would have to go through to be considered an expert, which would be the training class that we reviewed. And like I said, we only really reviewed 3 training courses so far. And, we've also used Spike, I have to say, as a consultant on this, because he's so expert and we're just not. Like Colleen said, that's not our expertise, but, we wanted to be done safely. So we knew we had to do something and not ignore it. But we also have, harvest mushroom cultivators, but those aren't considered, those are totally different. We have food processors that do mushrooms, that grow mushrooms, but those are totally different than the wild mushroom foraging.
Colleen, do you want to?
Sure. We really relied heavily on the guidance in the annex during our commission work, and also as this legislation was developed, in determining what elements should be looked at, either through the curriculum to determine who could be licensed or certified, and then also certainly the labeling suggestions. Those all were definitely, we relied on the annex in the food code for looking to what the ideal program elements should cover.
Okay. And I think, Cathy, you probably already answered this, but the question is, when wild mushroom species farmed, not foraged, are offered at a farmer's market, I guess it's specific to farmer's market, are they considered produce? Can they be offered at a farmer's market?
Yeah, I think if they came from, if they're cultivated, we consider those to be produce. And we don't actually even license produce, believe it or not. our DEM, our Department of Environmental Management, they do some things with produce on the farms, but if they start processing the produce, then we license them. So if they just like, pick, things without any kind of processing, they don't need a license with us at farmers markets. But if they started cutting them up or doing anything like that, they would need a license with us. But we don't have anybody right now that's doing, foraging wild mushrooms and selling them at farmers markets. But if we did, we'd have to make sure that there was one of our 3 that are certified for sure, because that would be, a disaster waiting to happen.
Colleen, would you like to add to that?
Sure. It's the same approach in New Hampshire, is that if they're with the whole produce outside of mushrooms, unless they are further processing it, cutting it, making salsa out of tomatoes, but whole uncut produce, we don't license those individual producers. We have heard instances of wild mushrooms being offered at farmers markets. So once this new law goes into effect, they would have to follow it and be licensed as part of that.
And I know you talked a little bit about labeling, but here's a question. It says, is there approval for packaging and shipping to restaurants? What is suggested to ensure approved source for food service facilities who have purchased wild mushrooms? Well, this is from other states across the nation. Maybe you could reflect on what you're doing within your state.
So
as far as
I'm
packaging.
not sure if I heard the whole question. So the only ones we've approved are the ones that, we've given a letter of approval to sell it to restaurants. We don't allow it to come from out of state or anywhere else. We'd consider that an unapproved source if we went into a facility. And we expect them to have the documentation in the facility and to keep it for 90 days. So we do check for things like that. Sometimes it's hard to know if it's, purchased or if it's foraged, but usually you can pretty much tell by the packaging, because the foraged mushrooms, they don't package them. They pick them up, they put them in, bags and things like that. And then they bring them, they do their labeling and record keeping, and then they bring them to the facility. And they have a whole process of how they do it in a sanitary way so that the mushrooms aren't damaged or, contaminated along the way. And they also have criteria on where they forage, because you don't want them foraging in a place where there's a lot of environmental contamination or even near a road. So there's a whole bunch of, there's a whole list of stipulations regarding where they can go.
Thank you. Anything from you, Colleen, with respect to packaging and delivery?
So the food code does allow anything that's coming from a commercial manufacturer to currently, as long as they can they can demonstrate that it was licensed or inspected from its origin. I mean, as Cathy mentioned, there are some challenges around that, but definitely anything in a package form that could be. I think the most challenging part is things that are coming across. Things that are coming from overseas, that to know, is it truly an approved source? Is it licensed and inspected? So those anything that's from a processing facility is currently allowed. Anything that going forward, anything foraged once our law comes into effect, whether it's anything offered in New Hampshire, they'd have to show that they were had some kind of oversight from their regulatory authority in their home state if it was coming from out of state.
Mary, am I missing anything in the chat? You get it all?
Yeah, no, I think you got it all.
So we saw things like interesting, very interesting subject. Thank you. Thank you. A lot of sharing of materials and so forth. Look at little nuggets of wisdom in the chat box to add to your great presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy and Colleen,
Thank
so
you.
much.